About rock legend Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix lived hard, and 24 years ago he died young in London. But the Hendrix legacy lives on. Jimi Hendrix left a mark on popular music that will never be erased. His music has found a new generation of fans who weren't even alive in the 60s when he soared like a shooting star. And like Elvis and others, Hendrix is worth more now that he's dead than he was when he was alive. His death has been shrouded in mystery ever since the London coroner issued an open verdict. We went to London to talk to Hendrix' friends. Chaz Chandler is the man who discovered Hendrix and made him a star.
I don't think the people around him by then were competent in any way. I think it could be a conspiracy of neglect, a conspiracy of idiocy.
Kathy Etchingham has forced a new Scotland Yard investigation.
I think there might have been a conspiracy, a cover-up.
Monica Danneman says there's no need for that.
As far as I know, Scotland Yard has found out that what I said at the time, 24 years ago, is exactly how it happened.
And then there's Noel Redding, Hendrix' bass player. He also talked to detectives from Scotland Yard. They're all telling very different stories about Jimmy's death.
It'd be nice to know what actually happened to my friend.
The unofficial story. Jimi Hendrix was a young genius who didn't have to die. Was he poisoned? Was there a fatal delay in calling the ambulance? Was there medical malpractice? Or was there something much deeper, much darker at work?
They have been saying for years that he was poisoned and all kinds of different things they say, you know, in regards to the mafia and the CIA and so on.
It should be known what happened that morning, whether even if the facts are unsavory. It needs to be known. Everyone has a right for their death to be investigated.
We'll explore the way Jimi Hendrix's life ended. But to understand his death, we first have to understand Jimi Hendrix's life and the time in which he lived. The 60s are a fading memory for many of those who were there. But 24 years after his death, Jimi Hendrix is still an icon. This time to a new generation of fans who weren't even alive in 1970 when he died. He was the ultimate rebel, who is now so mainstream General Motors used him to sell cars.
Jimmy ever met Eric the cream had just formed at that time. They said, well, bring him down, you know. Halfway through the set, they introduced Jimmy to come on stage. He walked on the stage, he started playing Killing Floor. And I looked, and I just saw Eric's hands just drop off the guitar. He's standing at the back, and he saw like a look of shock on his face. He put the guitar down and went off the stage. And I ran backstage, because I thought, is he all right, you know? And he was standing in the dressing room, and his hands were shaking, and he was trying to light a cigarette. And he just said, is he really that good, or is that the only song he can play? I says, he's really that good, Eric.
From that moment on, Jimi Hendrix was a legend in London. Not to the public yet, but to other guitar players, people like Keith Richards, Jeff Beck, and the Beatles, who would come to hear him play. Chaz Chandler hired bass player Noel Redding and drummer Mitch Mitchell to form the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Noel had been around the London music scene since the beginning.
See that place up there? That's where the Stones actually first rehearsed, I'd say in about 1962 or something, you know. Like the original pub, the Ship Pub, Wardour Street, which like all the musicians used to come in before, like the Marquee, like Keith Moon, John Entwistle, Peter Townsend, Jimi Hendrix, Mitch Mitchell. You'd see like Keith Richards in it, you know, all down the end, having a few pints. Be like young ladies who'd come here, etc. We were all about 21 in those days, you know. It was just, they were still sort of cheering maybe 10, 15 minutes after we stopped playing. Like in those days, it was pretty good, you know. And you know, there was no encores done. We couldn't do an encore because Hendrix had burnt his guitar, so.
He was totally unknown in America. But it was like watching what happened in England all over again. Because people, this guy just walked out, he was like nothing anybody had ever seen before, you know? And it took like, the people would be halfway through the number, through his first number, then they'd suddenly realise, we should like this guy. But it would be this sort of stunned, what? It was great to see it happening.
In one night, the Jimi Hendrix Experience had taken America by storm. For the rest of his life, for 2.5 more years, Hendrix's existence was a blur of LSD, recording studios, and concert dates. Days off were precious.
This is like history, I suppose. 1968, Palma Nova in Mallorca, Spain. Hendrix. We were all on holiday, and we never sort of thought that, well, I never thought that I'd be looking at something like this now, you know. People tell me we're all legends. I just wanted to play well and be appreciated.
But they were legends all over the world. When Hendrix played the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock a year before he died, there wasn't a guitar player in the world who thought he could touch it.
It wasn't just the stuff he played, it was his sheer breadth of ability. He was stunningly original.
And then, on a September night in 1970, Jimi Hendrix spent the night with a blonde German groupie named Monika Dannemann in her hotel apartment in London. He'd met Monika in Dusseldorf on a gig, one of hundreds of groupies that surrounded the band. But Monika says she was different, that Jimmy was going to marry her. It was the last night of his life. First, Hendrix jammed at a bar in Soho with some friends and went to a party afterward. He finally wound up in Monika's apartment. At some point in the night, he probably dropped acid, but that didn't kill him. It was the 9 sleeping pills that belonged to Monika that killed Jimi Hendrix. He was 27. The 60s had been over for a few months.
I just sat there, stood there, just stunned, you know. I just like mentally paralyzed for a year. You know, it was terrible.
I was always very suspicious. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a feeling I had.
Jimi Hendrix's first girlfriend in London was Kathy Etchingham. She was with him the whole 3 years of his stardom until she left to marry another man. Monika Dannemann was his last girlfriend. According to her, she was alone with him on the morning he died. Each woman says the other has something to hide. Scotland Yard talked to them both about the night Jimmy died. Next. In London in 1970, there was no doubt that drugs were the immediate cause. The official story was that Hendrix died as a result of barbiturate poisoning. Jimi Hendrix was the guy they were thinking of when they coined the phrase sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That Hendrix died as a result of a drug overdose surprised no one who knew him. But was there more? Noel Redding, the bass player for the Jimi Hendrix Experience, has been unsatisfied with the London coroner's report since the day it was issued in 1970. Noel Redding, Kathy Etchingham, and a number of Hendrix friends had seen Jimmy party hard over and over and snap back fine the next morning. So what happened this time? Why did he die? Could he have been poisoned?
In the evening, there was 3/4 of an hour where Jimmy went to a party where I wasn't there. I don't know what happened there. But I do know one thing, that people there gave him drugs, and he showed them to me, and then he threw them into the drainage.
Jimi Hendrix had a bouillabaisse of drugs in his bloodstream when he died. Alcohol, amphetamines, and the 9 barbiturate pills. On top of that, he may have been dosed with acid at the party. It would have been enough to kill anyone. But could his life have been saved? The women who loved him best tell completely different stories. Kathy Etchingham suspects Hendrix died either because Monika didn't call an ambulance quickly enough, or because Hendrix was mishandled by the ambulance crew when it did arrive. Like Noel, Kathy talked to Scotland Yard, but she did much more. She wrote to the Attorney General of England demanding a new inquest.
I feel I have a duty towards Jimmy, yeah. You know, when I was young, he looked after me.
If Kathy was Hendrix's first girlfriend, Monika was certainly his last, since she was with him the morning he died. Monika doesn't want any new investigations. She says all the facts are already known.
As far as I know, Scotland Yard has found out that what I said at the time, 24 years ago, is exactly how it happened.
Later on, I started reading biographies, and things were brought to my attention where it had been said that Jimmy was sat up on the ambulance and that he had been perfectly all right, apart from the fact that he was unconscious. He was breathing normally and he had a normal pulse, but that he was sat up on the ambulance. Well, of course, that would be a lethal thing to do.
For years, people have come up with all different ideas that the mafia killed him, that the CIA killed him. And the newest thing is that a former girlfriend of Jimmy, Kathy Etchingham, that she all of a sudden says that I didn't do everything I was supposed to do to help him.
what could have happened is that Jimmy was unconscious and Monica couldn't wake him up, and that she called in help and waited for them to come. And when they came, they realised that he was, you know, dangerously ill, and then they called an ambulance. So the delay might have been the time it took Alvinia to get to Monica's flat.
Had this sort of wild man image, but that's when he played. But apart from that, he'd be the sort of guy who would, if someone comes into the room, he'd stand up and open the door, let them sit down, you know, take their coat. He'd be very quiet, very polite. After our lifestyle, I think we're quite lucky to be here.
He was my love of my life. And normally you only meet that one time, if you meet that love.
Monica Danneman, the former skating teacher who wound up in a quiet seaside cottage in England, painting pictures of her one true love, a fly suspended in the amber of time. Kathy Etchingham, who once knew all the biggest names in rock, in a fine house in the London suburbs, with grown children, married to a doctor. And Noel Redding, who has tasted stardom, now noodles rock tunes trying to find the magic again. When Jimi Hendrix, the artist, was being born, the rock music scene was still being created around him. The Beatles were still new, so were the Rolling Stones. The musicians, the promoters, the agents, everyone was in their 20s. Everyone was stoned. For all except a few flinty-eyed businessmen, it was simply about the music. And then along came an unknown young American who played his guitar upside down, and he stood the whole world of rock on its head. His strings were like raw nerves when he plucked them, except to the businessmen. To them, it was the sound of cash register.
If I wanted to take up anything in them days, on my rights on Jimmy, it would have meant I'd have to sue Jimmy's father. And that certainly was something I was never prepared to do.
I think he completely changed the whole nature of rock and roll music.
He was a friend of mine, and I think that it needs to be cleared up. There's a lot of mystery surrounding Jimmy's death.
People tell me we're all legends. I just wanted to play well and be appreciated. But we were appreciated and we played well, but we never got paid, which is the other thing.
Jimi Hendrix's father is an old man now, a retired gardener in Seattle, Washington, who signed away the rights to his son's legacy years ago. He has filed suit to try to reclaim some of the new riches generated by his son. That trial begins next year. Noel Redding also took a buyout. He says he spent the 3 years he was Jimmy's bass player signing contracts he never read. Both of these men remain puzzled about the circumstances of Hendrix's death. Was there a plot to steal the Electric Gypsy's fortune? Kathy Etchingham has filed an appeal in London to force the release of the new Scotland Yard investigation.